Hey gang, I thought that I'd wrap up my series of my ships of the Carnival fleet and kind of go into what my thought process was when building out my fleet and also how it would fit into the larger structure of the organization that I am a part of and one of the leaders of. So first of all, my ship is the Banu Merchantman that once it's in, hopefully in I'm guessing 2 years, although they made a bunch of progress on it. So I'm assuming once they roll out the Polaris, they'll be able to roll out the Merchantman pretty quickly. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So let's go ahead and have the break. And when we get back, we'll go ahead and start this. Okay, so here we are. So you might notice there's a couple more ships now. So I'll kind of start with the history of the Carnival. I had basically run org-like structures, clans, factions, whatever you want to call them, for other games in the past. Some of them were pretty big. And when I was building out the Carnival, I kind of wanted to do something a little bit different. That's why I settled on a cellular structure where if you had, I kind of figure that most of the people will be playing this game in groups of probably about 3 to around 10. And I was thinking that would make a good sell. But the problem is, especially with Star Citizen, given the size and complexity of some of the ships, if you're in a group of even 10, you're kind of leaving other things on the table. You're making sacrifices to keep a group that size. And so how do you counteract that is you team up with another group of 10 people that their strengths are your weaknesses. So if you're a group of miners, you would team up with a group that's, say, interceptors or something like that, so they can protect you while you're doing it. You could also team up with another group that's all refinery people, so that you're just kind of keeping this constant flow, and then maybe a fourth group that's transportation, so you're building up these all of the ore and stuff like that. This other group is refining it, and this other group is transporting it back and forth and making money for the group as a whole. And so each little part of that group would be a cell. The whole thing taken together would be a supercell. And then over that, you kind of have these supercells that would be under a cluster. And then you'd have clusters that would be under a supercluster. So you can kind of do the math in your head. If each cell is around 3 to 10 people, and I mean, it could be up to 12 or 15 if you have like a very specific tight-knit group that you want to maintain. You could kind of do the math that if there were 3 to 10 cells in a supercell and 3 to 10 supercells in a cluster, 3 to 10, so on. You get the idea. But I kind of built it out that way because it would give people a lot more freedom. And so you can select who leads your supercell. And in this case, the leader may not necessarily be the person that gives orders for the whole cell. They're just the representative of that cell to the Carnival as a whole. And so they talk up to the supercell level. All of these little cell leaders talk to the supercell level and kind of organize what they're doing. And then the same thing, those cell leaders will pick someone to represent the supercell as a whole to the cluster. The clusters will pick what we call a busker, which is basically a cluster leader to represent it to the supercluster. And then they represent all of the superclusters or the supercluster is represented by one person that's a barker. And the barker is the highest elected position in the Carnival. And the reason that we kind of did it that way was so that one of the ideas behind the Carnival is to pick up smaller orgs and either groups of friends that don't have the money for the big ships. You can see there's several big ships here, and I'm going to be pulling even more on. It would be that we would load them up with ships and they could go explore the verse in these bigger ships or clusters of smaller ships, but it gives them kind of the freedom if they come on board as a smaller group of people, they still get a say in what happens in the org at large, whereas typically you kind of join an org and you just get lost in the sauce. But anyway, that's the structure of the Carnival. And so this is going to be specifically talking about what's effectively a supercluster that's mine. That's my supercluster. And since I am a ringleader, I am an unelected leadership of the Carnival. We also have a barker that represents the supercluster. So it's kind of two different things. I can't be both. I can be a ringleader or a barker. I can't be a ringleader and a barker. And so my supercluster has its own barker. But we'll get into that. So anyway, where this started was with a couple friends. And I originally, when I realized that the band immersion was going to probably grow bigger than it was, I pulled on a couple friends that I've had since college. We've known each other since like the early 90s, and we kind of all have these interests in these games. And I originally brought them on to kind of be crew on my ship, you know, that we could go and flit around the verse together. And one of my friends that's a techie type has a decent amount of money and immediately kind of broke into the wing commander levels. And his ship that he's waiting for is the Polaris. So he's over the moon right now. Another one of my friends who actually works in the medical industry in real life has the Endeavor Hope. And so right there, you can kind of see that that's a good branch. And then my third friend that I've recently got on here. So this is Knight 55, which he has Knight v Knight. I'll put a link down in the description below. And this is Sinister Puppy, so Sinister. And this is Pup Wolfie up here, who unfortunately doesn't have a computer that can actually run Star Citizen right now. But we've got kind of a nice little mix of ships here, but it's not quite... when I envision the Carnival, I'm kind of envisioning something that's self-sufficient, like completely self-sufficient, truly self-sufficient. And so with that in mind, like Sinister's Hope will probably just be joining me. Knight kind of has his own plans, and you'll notice when I'm kind of pulling out my supercluster here, there's going to be some things where you're going to be saying that seems like there's some holes in it. Typically when there's obvious holes, with one exception that I'll get to at the end, it's because it's probably going to be in Knight's fleet. So to kind of give you an idea, so as you can see, Knight has some heavy hitters, and this isn't all of his fleet by any stretch, but he also has his own plans for what he wants to do in the verse. And he said that before. And that's the other thing about the Carnival structure, is we're not going to dictate to you what you do with your ship. So we're not going to say you have to be here, you have to be here, you have to defend this ship, you have to work with this ship. It's mostly freedom of choice up to a point where the only real stipulations we have is don't bring trouble down in the Carnival. And so kind of clean up your own messes. So don't leave a system with a crime stat so that when we come back, the whole org is under fire by that system, or whatever the equivalent would be for the pirate system. So don't make a bunch of enemies with the pirates so that when we come back into that system, we're under constant fire. Our goal is to kind of be true neutral in like the purest sense of that word. So we go system to system together, but once we go into those systems, the Carnival, kind of like a real Carnival, kind of spread off into its different tents and kind of do our own thing in the system. If there's a call for mutual defense, then we'll either come together to defend ourselves or send forces out to defend different groups that are under specific attack. But anyway, you can kind of see we got a good Knight has a couple very interesting ships in his fleet that kind of pull up the defensive side. But as far as my supercluster should really be able to be largely self-sufficient, and that's the goal of the superclusters. Knight has enough ships to probably have 2 superclusters of his own. but they will probably be hounds or bouncers, which are offense and defensive respectively. So let me go ahead and clear these off, and I'll start going into what my supercluster would be. At some point, I'll probably have, I definitely want to have like Gruntling on here, who is my supercluster's Barker, and have Knight on here to kind of talk about his fleet and his ideas for it, and probably have Sinister and Pup Wolfie on here at some point to kind of talk about the game. Pup Wolfie would be really interesting because he hasn't been able to get into the game for so long. That'd be very new to him, and it'd be cool to get a new person's perspective. Real quick, outside of these ships here, you can see that two of them don't really match the others. Like, this would be great for building outposts, which who knows when we're getting the Pioneer, but it's out there. This one is super critical. Like, any fleet that doesn't have a Crucible in it, at least one, is not a well thought out fleet. And the only reason I don't have one in my supercluster is because I know Knight has one. I might actually go through a melt fest and get my own Crucible again, just to make my supercluster self-sufficient. Hi puppy, what you doing? Oh, do you have your cake? Oh, and we have our bone. What a good boy, what a good boy. Okay, so cleared the deck here, and now I'm just going to talk about my supercluster. So now I've cleared the deck, and you can kind of see that we're going to go back to just my supercluster. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. If you kind of want the exhaustive list, I've done the series before this where I kind of go through each ship and kind of in my brain how it's going to fit in there. But I thought it might be fun to kind of talk about the bigger ticket items and what it looks like when it's all together as a whole. So again, a Banu Merchantman, just starting at the simplest piece, is probably a cell unto itself. It has a crew of probably around 7 or 8 people, probably 10 if you're being honest. So that's kind of a cell to itself. And again, I kind of need to crew the thing up, which is, you'll see there's some big ships here. Now, this is kind of the thing, is that people will say, look at my fleet and how amazing it is. Usually when they do that on Reddit, my first question is, do you have a lot of friends? Because you don't have enough people to run one of those ships, much less all 300 of them, which is something to keep in mind too, if you're kind of getting into this game, is that this isn't like Eve where you control the ship in third person and in theory it has 300 people on it or 2,000 people on it and it's the size of a moon or whatever, but you control it by yourself. You're not going to be able to do that in Star Citizen. Even with NPCs, you're going to need some humans on your ship. And I would guess probably the minimum crew for Banu Merchantman, as far as like real human beings go, you're probably going to need at least 4 human beings to run a Banu Merchantman, if not more. I would say, to be safe, probably 6, couple engineers, people to man all the turrets, people to fly it. You're going to need a lot of people to run these bigger ships, like actual humans and the problem is, on that point, and I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds here a little bit, so this is the last time I'll kind of bring this up. Someone might want to sit in your turret for a game session or 2, or maybe even, who knows, like a year or something. Eventually someone is going to want to do their own thing. So finding people out there that just want to be crew is, I'm going to guess, maybe going to be 5% of the community. So you're really kind of, and those people are going to be a high demand, because all these people with these big ships are going to be like, crap, I don't have enough people to run this thing. I don't want to be flying around in Aurora for the rest of my game time. So anyway, more people. Part of the reason to make a big org like this is your chances of getting those people to crew are much better. And we do have a floater pool of individuals that join us, and they can kind of join cells or supercells or whatever as they want or as needed. So somebody could go into the floater pool from a cell and be like, hey, we really need someone that's a good engineer. And one of the floaters could be like, I could do it. And they pull them up for a little while. They work on the ship and then they just kind of go and do their own thing. Basically just true freelancers. Anyway, here we go. So start with the Man and Merchantman. It is actually not, since they've talked about the guns, I think it's got 2 size 8 guns up here on the nose. It's got like size 5s down there. I think it's got like a size 6 turret up here. So this thing will be a pretty heavy hitter on its own, but on its own, it's also a big target, and people are going to learn how to hit this ship. Even fully crewed, you're going to have problems with pirates if this is the entirety of your fleet. It does have a snub, which is, in most cases, it's a snub that can fit a Band Defender, which is not a bad combat ship. Not meta by any stretch, but it's not bad. But you're going to need some help around it. And to be truly self-sufficient, operating out in the deep black, you're going to need the ability to be out there for an indeterminate amount of time. So how do you do that? So one of my ideas that I had early on was to team the Banu Merchantman. Silly boy. So it's my dog's birthday today. So if you hear squeaking in the background, that's what that is. Anyway, teaming Merchantman with a hull D. And yeah, hull C is 2 arms. This is 3. So the hull D, the only thing I would do is take one of these arms and use it as a warehouse for my Merchantman. So basically just ancillary or additional cargo for the Merchantman. Everything else would basically be just set up for moving bulk cargo for the org. So basically just a money maker for the org. When you're talking the scale of cargo that a hull D can move, you could move kitty litter and you're going to make a big enough profit off of it that you're still going to be able to make a lot of money off of it. So that's kind of the goal. So you have this one for kind of specialized items or hard to find things, being the flagship of the entire carnival and being true neutral. The idea would be that other orgs that are kind of beefing with one another, if they needed a neutral space to kind of hash things out, they could come to my Merchantman and hash it out there as a neutral space that everyone's welcome, which you'll kind of get that theme with the carnival, is that our goal is to not have many enemies if we can at all avoid it. So you've got your moneymaker, you've got kind of your flagship here that's also a moneymaker, but also like a diplomat ship. But this is a big target. You've basically got a hardened loot pinata here and a definite loot pinata here. Like, I think this thing will have, probably once they actually start making it out, I'm assuming it'll probably have 4 turrets or so. So it won't be defenseless, but the cost benefit for a pirate is this amount of money and cargo. Why not attack that? That is a lot of money right there and worth taking a couple hits. And these two wouldn't be able to hold off a concerted attack. So how do you tell if someone is coming to get you? You have an early warning system. So a Carrack has great scanners to it and is an exploration ship. And so the idea would be that the Carrack would kind of be your early warning system. So it would go and get ping if necessary, but it would be able to tell if someone is coming, either friend or foe or unknown, neutral party. I mean, this is going to be a trade location in space. People are going to come there to trade in space. So with that in mind, you've got your early warning system, and I've actually got 2 of those. So this is Pariah and this is Pharaoh, are the 2 name ship. And I do have a name for my Merchantman, but until they clarify what their naming conventions are going to be, and I've said this before, I'm not putting the name out there because I don't want someone else to be like, oh, that's a cool name, I'm going to grab that first. Their way of assigning names is stupid. So I'm really hoping they're revisiting that. But anyway, 600i kind of falls into the same category. It has different strengths and weaknesses. It could carry a Tonk, which I'm assuming they're going to have bigger exploration vehicles at some point, but they're probably trying to build out things for Squadron 42. So yeah, it's a different style of ship. They have different strengths and weaknesses. So you have two scanner ships, just kind of tell you what's out there and what's coming for you. So again, you're kind of out there on your own. You're going to have a fleet. You're going to need to refuel. So I've got this Starfarer Gemini here for that. So that kind of fills a role too, is now you can, most of these ships, you'll notice that with these bigger ships, they're all long range, so they won't need to refuel as often. Typically, when you're refueling the big ships, you're probably going to do it at a location, like some kind of, hopefully a safe harbor, but wherever. You're not going to be refueling the big ships at this. You're going to be refueling the smaller escort and industrial ships. So you've got this ship that can refuel things. In that vein, you have the Odyssey, which, in my opinion, what the Odyssey is less of a carrot killer and more of a supplement. So the Carrack would actually be the one that's way out in the deep dark and says, hey, we found X. We found like a large wreck, let's say a Bengal carrier wreck or Kingship wreck or something like that you can salvage. And then the Odyssey would go in with a group of smaller ships and salvagers or whatever and get it. Or the Carrack would find a huge mine store and the Odyssey would go out there with a group of mining ships and kind of mine it. It would be basically the sort of central headquarters for that operation. But that's the idea with the Odyssey here, is it would be a supplementary ship to refueling. Also kind of falls into that explorer category because it will have some pretty big scanners. So with that in mind, kind of with the refueling deal, and hang on, I'm going to reorganize a little bit here. So kind of keeping with the idea of cells, supercells, clusters, superclusters, that sort of thing. This you can kind of see would start to make out a almost like a cluster of ships. So you've got your sort of headquarters ship for the called a cluster. You've got probably a mole would be its own cell, a couple prospectors, and an expanse, which is the refinery ship, would probably be a cell. So these two would probably make a group. Salvage ships like vultures would probably be teamed up with something like a caterpillar, which caterpillar I think is one of those things that almost every fleet needs, just because it'll be modular. So you're basically going to be able to turn the caterpillar into whatever you need it. And there's another ship like that I'll get to that in a second. But the caterpillar I would kind of see as being a part of this group, as kind of being the cargo runner. And sort of in the same vein as a refueler, I also have a Vulcan out there that would be working as kind of the pickup truck. So if your little ships are breaking down, even if your big ships are breaking down or need parts or need like a quick refuel, like this is operating away from the Starfarer, this can refuel, the Starfarer can refuel the Vulcan, and the Vulcan can go out and get the little guys. So you don't have your big, slow Starfarer going out on its own and kind of making a dangerous journey just to refuel a little guy and come back. Again, the cost benefit isn't there. So the Starfarer fuels up a Vulcan, which is a much smaller ship, that goes and refuels like a mole or a prospector and then goes back to the Horde. So you can kind of send out your tendrils. Now you might notice that, and by the same token, throw this in there too, you'll have an SRV in the group that can tow any broken ships or big parts. Like let's say that you get like a big haul and you're kind of like, let's just pull all of these things back into the central area. where we can all work on it here and kind of be protected, as opposed to all of us kind of spread out and doing our thing. I think the SRV will be really good for that. Plus, if a ship breaks down, it can tow it in. Hopefully that won't happen, but it could. By the same token, you've kind of got the small refinery ship. This is the Galaxy, and the Galaxy kind of falls into the same role as the Caterpillars. It's kind of a jack of all trades. I do think I will typically keep the Galaxy in the refinery form from what I'm thinking right now. I think the cargo form isn't really all that useful. The medical form is, because you can basically kit the Galaxy out right now as cargo, medical, or refinery. And I would think for a mobile fleet, the refinery would probably be the most useful. And the reason I wouldn't go medical is because of Sinister's Endeavor Hope. But in the interest of keeping this self-sufficient, like making sure my supercluster can take care of itself and it's not wholly reliant on anyone else, going medical on occasion might not be a bad idea, which would mean carrying that medical module around with me. So for the next topic, there's going to be smaller ships. And so again, Knight has a Kraken. I think he might have two. Could be wrong on that. I think he might have two Krakens. I know he has one. But the idea of keeping it self-sufficient, this Liberator can actually carry 3 ships and stuff on the inside. So this would be a good way to kind of get littles out there, like the Prospector, the Vulcan, Vulture, things like that. You could probably stack 3 of those up there, or 2 Prospectors and Expanse, whatever. That would be a good way to get smaller ships out there. Would also be a good way to transport fighters, because again, you'll notice something that's missing from this is any kind of defense. And if you watch the previous show or shows where I was going through all my ships, you know there's some heavy hitters in there. So let's go ahead and get into that. So Retaliator is kind of a good Connie size ship. And I have a Connie too that kind of fills the same role, except that's more gunboat. This is for taking out bigger ships that are there. And the idea there is, it should be pretty obvious that this is there to just kind of deter bigger ships. So it would stick with this group, but it also has the range that can largely keep up with the bigger ships in the fleet. And by the same token, I've got the Redeemer that kind of does the same thing. So both of these guys are heavy hitters just to give someone some pause. And of course, I've got some fighters in my fleet that would be along for the ride too. That would be part of this supercluster. But this is where I kind of get into what I call my Death Star. So the first part of the Death Star is the Hammerhead. And so this is Carnivore, kind of playing off the Carnival name. Carnivore, of course, is a hammerhead. Hammerheads are made for taking out light fighters. So light fighters would be a danger to the smaller ships. Something like the Eclipse could actually be a danger to some of the bigger ships. I don't think an Eclipse will be able to pop any of the subcaps here. Maybe a 600i, maybe a Galaxy with one volley. But it could do some damage. It could do some real damage. So being able to deal with light fighters is important, and fighter screens. If you've ever seen any of the Mongrel videos, a lot of what they do is small craft attacks just to take someone down, and then they'll bring in like the cargo ship and unload everything. So having a ship that counters light ships is pretty key. On that note, so I moved the Death Star to the upper right. On that note, the Perseus is an extremely heavy hitter made for hurting ships around this size. So if somebody wants to bring, say, a Polaris into the fight and attack the fleet, unlike an Eclipse, a Polaris is a huge threat to all of these ships. It's got something, it can shoot 4 size 9 torpedoes at once, and I think it carries enough of them that pretty much all of these big ships would be dead, and it has the firepower to hold it off. So if Knight is off doing his own thing with his heavy hitters, a ship like the Perseus could lay some hurt on this, may not be able to kill it, but it would give it pause. And that is kind of our goal in the Carnival, is we want to make ourselves enough of a hard target that pirate groups or people that want to attack it would take a look at it and be like, we're going to take so much damage, this either isn't worth it, or they're saying they're open to trade, we need missiles or parts or whatever, or we need to launder some stuff, so they'll buy our stuff, we can buy supplies off of them and make a go for a softer target. That's the goal anyway, is to make the Carnival a hard enough target that people would rather deal with us or not deal with us by going away rather than attack us. And part of that is creating an intimidating enough core that people actually engage in that behavior as opposed to attacking us. And the final piece of my Death Star, right now this is housed as an A2, but I do have the CCU, the Nautilus, whenever we get it. Now the idea with the Nautilus, and I do have a CCU from a Nautilus to a Polaris, just in case this doesn't work out. So I may not be reliant on Knight for the Polaris. For the Idris, I would be. But with the Nautilus, it's a mine layer. And so the idea would be that the Nautilus would come along and lay a minefield around kind of this core of ships, and anyone that came in that was friendly wouldn't be attacked. Anyone that turned red, or that I assume at some point we'll be able to designate someone as an enemy, they would be in the middle of a minefield. And there's two different types of mines. You could have the ones that would explode, which probably wouldn't be a great idea on a fleet. But they have the ones with lasers, and those would be, because especially for little ships coming into that, that would be extremely dangerous to all of a sudden go hostile in the middle of a minefield with the ships that are around here, with like a Hammerhead, Redeemer, the other fighters that are in there. That's not gonna go well for them. Could also lay down the bigger mines too. They're explosive on the outside to kind of discourage bigger ships from going hostile. And finally, this is the Gaytech Orion. So if you're wondering how this fits into the rest of the fleets, it looks cool, and that's it. Just looks cool. But that's kind of the idea of the core of my superclusters. You kind of have a good balance of things here. You have your defense kind of accounted for. You have refueling, and also the whole production line of refueling. So you have miners that can go out and mine quantanium and hydrogen, I guess, is what you burn when you're flying around, and not going quantum. You have your refinery ships that can refine that into fuel. You have your refuelers that can refuel the ships. So right there, you're kind of self-sufficient. You have big enough ships here for running cargo. Yeah, I think between like those, maybe not the Galaxy, the Odyssey, Starfarer, Carrack, 600i, definitely the Hull D, and the Merchantman could all carry enough food and water to keep a supercluster provisioned for the entire time we were working in a system. So if we were to go through Pyro, where resources are a little bit harder to come by, would we be able to survive the week or 3 weeks or however long we were going to stay in that system before we could go to a system like Stanton and reprovision? That's kind of the goal in what's going on here. You have your early warning devices, you have enough firepower to kind of keep people honest, and that builds a self-sufficient fleet. So you've got your eyes, you've got your fists, and you've kind of got the reason that people would want to trade with you. And even if they don't, you've got the ones that can make resources on their own and stuff that looks cool. And my ship. But that's pretty much it for my supercluster. Obviously, there's smaller ships in here that I didn't include that also fill in little gaps here. One thing you might notice that's missing is one of these monsters. So this is the Orion, and of course this is the capital size, or I guess technically subcap, but I mean you can see its size here. It's bigger than the Merchantman. The Merchantman's huge. Like, I think the Polaris is actually the same size as the Merchantman now, but you get a sense for the scale of this thing. It's enormous. But the Orion is something that I recently discovered. None of us in the Carnival have an Orion. So I will probably be melting a bunch of my little ships, like my fighters and stuff like that I don't use too often. Might take a hard look at some of my bigger ships that I think are cool, but I don't use too often, and might try to upgrade to an Orion before they start building it out and the price kicks through the roof, because this thing's going to be easily $700 or $800 when they actually start making it. But this right here is both a miner and a refiner, and you have that in this group, and you're truly self-sufficient. You can mine and refine fuel and any alloys for repairs. You could probably craft. We don't have a crafting ship, but there really isn't a crafting ship in the game yet. Probably the closest we have right now in concept is the Crucible, but that's kind of the idea. This one, again, I'll reiterate, is not actually a part of the Carnival. No one in the Carnival has an Orion, which kind of blew my mind. I think I was not the only one that went through and melted stuff in order to buy something cool. I basically, in the last IAE, I melted a bunch of things to get a Kraken of my own, just to transport all my little ships. And I won the F5 lottery, but when I was able to get in, they didn't have it for credit. You couldn't buy for credits. So I got a Galaxy instead, which actually kind of fits my role in the Carnival a little bit better. Like, I wouldn't say, obviously I'm not leaving all of the defense tonight, but I'm relying him on a fair amount of defense for the Carnival as a whole, or at least this central cluster. But that is my supercluster. I feel like it's pretty balanced. I put a lot of thought into how this thing could be self-sufficient and protect itself. But let me know what you think. Like, if you have similar ideas, if you think there's some glaring things that are missing from here, you got suggestions, lay them on me. Or if you just want to talk about your own ships and your own ideas, or if you want some advice, let me know, because I've been theory crafting on this forever and kind of chewing on this and trying to build different fleet ideas before I eventually zeroed in on this. It took a couple years. So yeah, I'd love to hear it. So let me know down in the comments below, and like and subscribe if you've been here a few times, and see me next time.